Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to In the Company of Charity podcast. My name is Sister Liz, and I'm here as always with my favorite co-host, Sister Elizabeth. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I was thinking next season we need to introduce each other differently. I think for like 4 seasons or 5, we've said my favorite co-host, my only co-host, my sister
Sister friend.
friend, sister friend. Yeah, that's the seminary sisters love that term. I love it too. So it's always like, oh, your sister friend. It's a
Because
great term.
FYI, we are friends in real
We
life.
are, and we're sisters. Yeah, in real life.
done.
Yeah, so we are sister friends. Anyways, I'm here. Yeah, it's Sister Elizabeth, and I'm here with
Sister Liz. Here we are.
Yeah.
So it's summertime. We have one more episode after this one, and then we'll take a little mini break and come back in September. But that could be for next episode. But summertime is an exciting time usually for the Daughters of Charity because there's all kinds of stuff happening. So what's happening for you this summer?
Well, I'm going to be, actually, I have a birthday coming. Shout out for my 63rd birthday. I'm so excited.
Woo-hoo.
Yeah, so excited. It's fun to think about it here in the seminary, because it's just a different kind of vibe, as we say here. They'll laugh if they hear that. They'll be like, "Oh my gosh,
the vibe."
She's like such a mom or something. It's one of those. Mom uses the words.
You're giving me that like Gen Z vibe right now.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? We had this conversation the other night about generations, and I said I was a cusper and of a baby boomer, right? I'm not a baby boomer.
You're a Gen X cusp.
I'm not, though, because I was born in 1960, and they said that's not even close to the cusp. The cusp is like 1964. So
you're
get over
far
yourself.
from the cusp.
I'm far from the cusp. I don't know what I am, but anyways, all of that said, we are going to have a great birthday party because we love to have birthdays. So we just love that everyone was born and that we get to celebrate their birthdays, and we do it more for the whole community, the whole local community, because it's not just your celebration. Everybody gets a party, so that's awesome. So we're going to do that, and then we are, and the other thing is you have to schedule it because you're trying to schedule it with the schedules of like 8 other people in your house. Very rarely does it happen on your actual birthday, but that's okay.
That's true.
And you can get 2 days, the actual day and then the party later, so I think that's good. And then we are going on retreat. Oh, thanks be to God.
That's so
8
exciting.
days in Evansville in the quiet of a wonderful, wonderful facility that is just such a blessing to us. So we're very excited about that. 8 days.
It's going to be beautiful.
Whew, it's going to be incredible. Yeah. So retreat is going to be great. I'm doing a poetry retreat.
Oh,
with one of my favorite sisters, Sister Mary Beth Cabrera. I'm very excited. And so there's a priest retreat with Father Cormac, and then I think Sister Ann Higgins is doing a directed retreat, and then Sister Mary Beth is doing a guided poetry retreat, which is, I just love that.
Totally up your alley, by the way.
Well, totally. But also that we have all these options, like it just, whatever you kind of feel like that year you're in the mood for, so yeah, I was very excited about this retreat. So I'm excited. That gets me, it through into August, and then August is a whole other situation. We're going to have a new seminary sister coming. We're very, very excited about that. And the seminary sisters who are currently here will be going on their apostolic experience for 6 weeks. So,
we're getting one, by the way.
I know. I
take it.
Share with my sister friend.
Woo.
My sister friend. Yeah. So anyway, so that's kind of my summer. It's going to be busy but exciting.
Yes. For me, 1 week from the airing of this episode, I will be in Niceville, Florida. You heard that correctly, Niceville, where my brother lives. My parents are coming down, so home visit time, and the Emerald Coast. It will be absolutely beautiful and a welcome reprieve from, well, it'll be a heat still. It's hot. In Florida's hot, but at least I'll have a nice back porch and be able to look out on the water.
And family around and time to relax. That's awesome. I
Yes.
absolutely love. I mean, and any of our listeners who know the Schoberg clan, to have them live
They're a different
in
breed.
Niceville on the Emerald Coast is like uh, that's a twofer for sure. I mean, that's like winning all the way around for the Schobergs.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
gonna
that's
be fun.
great. Yeah,
And they
that's awesome.
recently, my brother, Paul and Stacy and the kids went to Monterrey, Mexico, a few weeks ago to do some service
Nice,
work. And um, apparently it was transformational for them. And so I'm looking forward to hearing
nice.
more about their experience of service. And, um, it's kind of like, ooh, maybe they like what I like now, like it just
Yeah, yeah.
adds
Trying to
together.
channel in the sister vibe, right? Because yeah, that's
So
awesome.
it's good. And a lot of our sisters take time for home visit and retreat over the summer
Hmm.
just because of scheduling. And so this is a time where people are really taking that time to get to the things that are core to our life, and that connection and that prayer with God and all of that. So it's pretty cool. I'm excited.
It is cool. Yeah, it is. And so we just ask the Lord to keep us all safe on our
Hmm.
journey and bring us back refreshed, renewed, revitalized for the mission ahead.
Yes. And you guys are going to love this episode. So we don't want to waste too much time chatting. We could go on, but this is so cool. So cool learning about the archives. I love Emmitsburg. We all know that. But if you ever get in there into the archive space, it's a whole different world. Just
Yeah.
temperature controlled, humidity controlled. They have these walls that you turn this little gadget and the wall moves and you can open up different areas. It's just so neat. So tell us a little bit about who we're going to hear from today.
Yeah, so we're going to hear from Scott Keefer, who is the archivist for the province of St. Louise, USA. And it is housed at the shrine, the Basilica of Elizabeth Ann Seton. And I just appreciated talking to him so much. I think it's when you hear your own story, right? The story of the company of charity as it is in the United States, told to you through like the eyes of a person who's just seeing it through documents and artifacts. And it just takes on this very kind of mystical um, excavation. Like,
Mm.
you imagine that this whole area and then the whole country becomes part of a huge excavation of God's graces and just kind of scattering his graces of charity across the country. Sounds goofy, but it really is quite remarkable to me that this archive, because it's housed at the shrine of Elizabeth Ann Seton. I think people think it's just about her, and
Mm.
it is predominantly. I mean, there's a lot about her, about Elizabeth Ann Seton, who's a saint, the first American-born saint. I mean, just crazy, right? But she is this catalyst in our country for the company of charity of St. Vincent de Paul, right? I mean, she is the reason that the Daughters of Charity are here, that the Federation of Charity, all of those sisters of charity across the country came together, were formed, were dedicated to service of the poor, finding Christ in the poor. All of the bits of the charism that St. Vincent and St. Louise were infused by the Holy Spirit, 400 years ago, landed in the United States and was really nurtured by St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. And so it just, to me, is just amazing how this archive pulls us back to the past, right? To a time when our country didn't even exist, as it is as the United States, right? And then it helps us to keep moving forward. I don't know. I just found it pretty interesting,
And
and some of the archives, some of the things he talks about, they're going to blow your mind. The stuff we have there, it just is amazing to me. So, and he knows his stuff. He knows exactly what he's
mm,
talking about, and he loves it. He loves it, and that's comes through so clearly. And that's also so encouraging that somebody just loves the story of our lives, and sees God's grace in it.
and he shouts out the podcast as a historical thing to keep
Yeah,
forever. I
yeah,
mean, that's
it's
kind of cool, y'all.
archival. I did. We were touring the archives when we were visiting there. We had talked a little bit about how we had just visited um, as the seminary, a part of their heritage trip, and we toured the archives. And he was showing them different ways in which archival material is stored, right? Like artifacts and documents and all different kinds of paintings. And we saw all of it. And then he had a laptop out and he said, and then there's of course digital things. And to be perfectly honest, I kind of wandered off at that point. And all of a sudden they start saying, "Sister, come and listen, come." And it was my voice. And I was like, what's happening?
The voice.
The voice. And there it was. He had it on the laptop. He said, this is archival information. Like, we learned so much about the company and the conditions of things. He said, so this was to me the remarkable thing. He said, if you want to know, and he might even mention this, so you don't want to give too much of his interview away, but said, if you want to know what happened, what the sisters were doing during COVID, the podcast is like one of the only places that is documented certain sisters and the activities of how the province was managing, either through these experiences of our intro, right? Because
completely valuable information, people. So valuable.
Right. Like, now everyone knows what the weather was like when this was happening in the province. It's important. So important. Right. So anyways, we go on. We really don't want to waste their time. We don't want to waste our own time. Although we don't ever think talking is a waste of time.
We love it.
Yeah, please enjoy it. Listen to this one a number of times, and I think you're going to love it. And hello to Scott, because I'm sure he's
definitely listening. We love you, Scott. And do share this episode, not just with the history buffs in your life, but maybe the people who want to know more about how the church has continued to evolve and change and stay the same over decades and millennia, etc. So God bless you guys. If you have any feedback for us, please don't hesitate to reach out to us on our email, companyofcharity@gmail.com, and our Instagram, Company of Charity Podcast. We love you guys. We pray for you. Have a good one. Enjoy the episode.
Hi, everyone. This is Sister Elizabeth, and as you know, you're listening to In the Company of Charity, the podcast of the Daughters of Charity.
And I am Scott Keefer, and I am the archivist for this province of the Daughters.
Yes, and so the province of the Daughters he's referring to is the province of St. Louis, USA, and there's also the province of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. So talk to us a little bit about how you got into archival work, and then what does it mean to you to be in this position? It's a pretty unique one to be.
For sure.
Yeah, an archivist of a community of sisters who really date back 400 years in some ways, but since the 1810s here in this country.
Right.
So tell us all about yourself and your work.
So this would be in 2013, 2014 or so. I was an undergraduate getting a history degree at Allegheny College in Northwest PA. And going in about my junior year or so, I realized that I needed to find a way to live. And so I applied to a slew of internships and summer positions, summer apprenticeship type of things. And the one that I got was with the Pennsylvania State Archives. I found that it was something that I really enjoyed, and I sort of took it from there. I went to grad school for public history at St. John's University, Vincentian School in Queens, New York. Got some experience at a couple different institutions out there. I bounced around in New York for a few years. I got my first full-time job in Northern Virginia with one of the county governments. It was a contract position, and as that contract was running out, I applied. I saw the daughter's position. I saw a lot of words related to the Vincentian family, and because of my time at St. John's, I could, with full legitimacy, go and say, yes, I am familiar with some of these things. And the daughters accepted me. So that's how I became the archivist, and that was 5 years ago now.
Wow, that's it. It's funny how the Vincentian charism draws people in many different ways. Sometimes it seems accidental, but when you know about the Vincentian charism, you know nothing is accidental.
Sure thing.
Everything is about providence and bringing together those that God sees need to be together. So we're so excited to have you on the podcast today because, as I just said, we had this visit to the archives, and I began to realize just, we have these things in storage, and it feels like things that are just like down in the basement, but that is not what this is.
No. Really, the fundamental purpose of archives is for them to be used. There was that sort of time in days of old in the archival world where things, were kept to be kept. No, we are trying to find ways to go and use these items. Some of them get used more than others. The single most requested, asked for item in the archives is what we call the Satterley photo, which is the group of the Daughters of Charity who were Civil War nurses in front of the Satterley Hospital in Philadelphia. So that's a photo from 1863 is our single most requested item.
Wow. What's interesting to me is as we were walking through, I think probably the last time I had a deep archival visit like that was when I was in the seminary 26 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm walking through and saying, there might be pictures of me, not that anyone's asking, but I might ask someday. Or we know that we tell our story we tell our own life story with pictures, certainly at the end of our lives. And you begin to realize that everything we do, because it's connected to something so much bigger than ourselves as individuals, becomes in some way, a record of the history of the company itself, and certainly the history of it in the United States, which I just found really fascinating. So I think everyone walks through it and you say, this is Sister So-and-so's box. The first thing you want to do is say, where's my box? You realize you're really just a little envelope somewhere, but that these things are being kept because they are part of, as I said, a history greater than ourselves. So can you talk a little bit about what, as you said, you were Vincentian from being at St. John's and then seeing this, and so there was that kind of connection. What have you learned, I guess, about the company of charity, the Daughters of Charity, and the way in which it's manifested in this country, which is very different than it is in other countries?
Well, in terms of how much I learned, how many episodes of this pod do you want to put out? Because I could go for a long time on that one.
I bet.
You want to talk about individual missions? I could do it.
Yeah.
About how it's manifested in this country. You see how you definitely see the growth and the development of the community. You definitely see the way that the capital C Church has interacted and evolved and grown in the United States. You see, when you see into spiritual writings, you see the development of the theology of the church, not just in the last 200 years globally, but certainly within the last 200 years in the United States. Sisters' spiritual journals and spiritual writings who passed away in the 2010s are quite different from the way Mother Seton expressed her spirituality 200 years ago. Well, that's the thing about a religious archive, is that you're fundamentally, in a way, trying to archive something that is not physical, that is spiritual, that is of the ether, of the non-material. And in ways that's difficult. We can collect rosaries, we can collect spiritual writings and hymnals. That's a way to do that, but that doesn't express the full extent of it. At the same time, you can also collect the material ways that manifests. Sister Matilda Coskery wrote her medical manual in the pre-Civil War times. And it's a very methodical way to do nursing and medicine in that time period. A lot of it is, herbal and comfort care, because medicine was not particularly evolved at that point. But at the same time, that's the way that type of charity and that type of charism manifested itself in many ways, is care for the sick and for the injured. And exactly how they did that, that's something that you can capture very, very well.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating point. I hadn't really thought about that. That we have the sense that it's about people and places and events and the documents that prove or disprove history.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, we have this paper that says it actually happened this way,
Sure.
and we can document it and be able to say and certify it that this is truth. But what you collect over time, as you're saying, is an understanding of the evolution of something that is ethereal. It's more, it's the spiritual sense of the theology that develops. So the things that stay, the things that are solid, as well as the things that change over time and become more understood, or we nuance them more. And I'm thinking,
exactly,
yeah, of things like, even when you think about St. Catherine Labouré with her visions of Mary, O Mary conceived without sin, pray for us or have recourse to you. The quote, the line around the image, that sense of Mary conceived without sin, as dogma has developed, and in our understanding of it has developed over time. And here is this young woman in the seminary, early stages of her vocation, having this experience and being given words to express that dogma in a way, but how would she know it? So the saving of the archives of that event, but also documents a new understanding.
And then when you have, a small box of those miraculous medals, and there's one in French, and one in English, and one in Russian, and one in Mandarin, and one in Spanish, and now you have a physical manifestation of the type of universality of that message.
Yeah.
The fundamental difference between an archive and a library is, number one, uniqueness. You can go to, if I want a copy of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, I could probably find it at any local public library or school library in America and the world. If I want the original papers of Elizabeth Seton, those go to one. Those you really, really, for 90% of those papers, you go to one place, and that's the archive in Emmitsburg. And even, the Mother Seton's papers got dispersed a little bit, but within the last year, with the Sisters of Charity of New York beginning their completion process, we worked with their archivists to go and transfer some of their Mother Seton writings back to Emmitsburg to further complete that funds, that collection. So some of those manuscripts that were divested from the bulk of Mother Seton's writing, now they're back together.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating too, that there's ways in which things get dispersed. As you say, we take things with us, that we think are of value or ours, and then eventually the efforts to put them all back together.
Well, even you think about compare Mother Seton to St. Vincent. Mother Seton's writing to St. Vincent's writing. Mother Seton lived 200 years ago. Vincent lived 400 years ago. In that 200-year gap between them, Vincent's writings got dispersed so much farther. There is no one bulk location for Vincent's writings. Really, the folks who went and did the whole collected correspondence project, at one time, that was kind of the big way that you brought those writings back together as much as possible.
But the original documents are kind of scattered, and so you're going to different places in order to create this. I know, we have to give a shout out to Sister Marie Poole.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable. Sister Louise Sullivan collection of St. Louise's writings. The gift to us of having them in English is, when you look at the world, when you think the Daughters of Charity are in 96 different countries, and even in our own mother house, you'll see, the translation or the interpretation board has got like 12 different options of languages. You realize we are a pretty diverse and international and intercultural group.
100%.
So for us to have these documents in English is incredibly valuable, not just for the United States or England or those countries where English is their first language, but for those countries where English is second or third language, there's ways we can read the bulk
Yes.
of the writings where we could never travel around.
Absolutely. And obviously, you know, the internet is a way to go and do that so much more.
You know, I realize the internet it changes everything in so many ways, and we're you know, so excited to be able to get like the echoes of the company, which is the document that's put out worldwide for any articles and any sessions, any talks, anything to do with the company at large, the company of the Daughters of Charity at large, not just one place or another. It's a record keeping of what's happening in real time. In some ways, we get them about 2 months later, but
So do we.
yeah, but those are now digitized, and we can get them online, and now they're even creating audio files of those.
Yeah.
We get excited about. We have more access, and also we can get to them quickly.
Well, that's even, the Echoes are a good example here. So the Echoes, the company, are a I don't want to say magazine.
Yeah, it's hard to.
Yeah, it's a collection of modern writings on various subjects, sent around to, you know, by the daughters in Paris for the entirety of the company. They're published in, you know, a couple different languages. And yes, the archives does have all editions of it, and now they're started to go and do the audio editions. But with the audio and the print, there's a matching set there. Which is good, because even if the audio is a preferred method or a more difficult to use method, there's always the written version to go back to, which for some people is easier or more difficult. You know, these podcasts, we keep a copy of these podcasts in the archive as a record in the future.
I cannot tell you how excited I was to hear that. I thought, we're archival, guys.
Yeah,
We're archival.
absolutely. At the end,
this is something to keep.
At the every break, season and half season mark, we go and we collect all the episodes.
I think that's awesome.
And I will say, a podcast in a certain way is a very easy record to archive. I shouldn't say that. No digital record is easy to archive, but a podcast at least has a title and what we call the metadata, the information about the information. So there's a title, there's a guest list, and there's a block of text with some keywords that tells you exactly what that episode is about. For a lot of other audiovisual formats, whether that is digital, where there's never been a physical in the first place, or if that's an old reel of film, sometimes that is missing, and that makes things more difficult. That makes them much more difficult to use. Because even the podcast, at least you can go and skip around and be like, okay, this is about the point where they seem to be talking about this.
We realize, I think, as we've continued in this, that it's not always about listenership, right? Although it's important to have listeners, we of course it is, and you know, whether we have 100 or 1 million, whoever's hearing us is learning something, and they're getting something out of it. But the sense that they are recording real-time information and history being told at a particular time so that it's preserved.
Absolutely. In 1866, Father Francis Burlando, who was the provincial director at the time, the Vincentian priest who oversaw the community, sent a letter around saying, something big and important just happened, the Civil War. Write down what you did. It's important. Send it in. This is worth keeping and worth preserving. And today, that's the Civil War annals. It's all the recollections. Yeah. So it's not recorded in real... The Civil War annals aren't recorded in real time, but it's recorded not that long afterward. And even for some of those, you know, big province-wide, country-wide questions, when people have asked us, what did the daughters do during COVID? The first place that I directed people were episodes of the podcast.
Nice. I like that. Yeah, that's great. And it just really does help us to understand that what we see us doing in our own time as being culturally appropriate. This is what they do now. This is how we, you know, communicate with the world. We don't do it this way anymore. We do it this way. We're using Facebook at one point, and then we're using YouTube videos, and then we're on, you know, Twitter, and then we're moving to Instagram, and then we're moving through all of these different ways as media and the digital world creates for us. but using it, you begin to realize something like a podcast is not something that's going to disappear in 30 seconds or in 3 hours, or it's not going to get lost in some other. We've got some control.
Hopefully,
over this.
Ideally, hopefully.
Yeah.
There does have to be. I do want to make clear there does have to be human intervention for these type of digital records.
Yes. Yeah.
And we are trying to do that sort of thing in the archives, particularly for this type of new media or even web presence. We take website captures of the daughters' websites and their current sponsored works. So, what is Proyecto Juan Diego down in Brownsville, Texas, doing in 2018, 2019? Well, we can go and tell you exactly what their calendar of events was for that time period.
Yeah. That's interesting. And we might think, what's happening right now, what value is that going to have? And it's when you look back at something like the Civil War annals, you say, well, we would know nothing about what the daughters were doing if somebody just didn't write down their thoughts, like, oh, I remember this happened and that happened. And it becomes almost, in a way, that sense of having a date book that helps us to see back in time. Journals that, we would keep or not keep, that all of it helps to record. So tell me, this is... I just find the archive so exciting, and I think you're right. We will have to have more episodes than this. But as the archivist of the province of St. Louis, USA, and this might be a tough question or it might be absolute, the answer right away. What would you say are the 2 or 3 single most impressive pieces? They don't have to be the most oldest or the most worth or whatever. What are the most impressive pieces that we have?
I point to the Martin Luther King signature.
Yes, you shared that with us. Yeah, that is incredible.
In 1964, Sister Mary Williams Sullivan was the director of Mariac Social Center in Chicago, and she and a group of other religious leaders in the city held a commemorative banquet. It was the Chicago Religious Interracial Council, some name like that. And they held a banquet for the newly announced Nobel Peace Prize laureate, who was Dr. King. And Sister Mary Williams Sullivan was the master of ceremonies. So there's the photo of her up at the podium next to Dr. King. And there's a program from the event that Dr. King went and signed. And he signed it, Sister Mary William, in gratitude for your love of Christ and your concern for the poor.
Wow. That is precious. I mean, that's precious in so many ways.
Yeah.
In relation to, I think, again, if we can take something just like that, a photograph and a signed program, and talk about then the impact, the role of the work of the Daughters of Charity during an incredibly difficult time in our country, during the Civil Rights Movement and interracial issues. And here we are now in 2023 in the same situation, looking again at diversity and equity and inclusion and saying what we had hoped we could get right then, we realize we're not there yet. And yet that helps to mark for us this effort within the community, our consciousness of interracial relationships.
Yeah, that's usually the single, couple pieces of paper that I point to.
Yeah, that's...
Something that's always fascinated me were the Mariac College literary journals. Mariac College was an institution run by the daughters from 1957 to 72-ish. But it was a undergraduate institution run by the daughters, a women's college specifically for professed women of religious communities. And so even though these are all sisters of some community or another, not just the daughters, but lots of communities, they had a college literary journal. And in a lot of ways, it reads like a literary journal from any other school. But at the same time as that, in the first or second edition, there's a daughter who wrote a piece just gushing about J.R.R. Tolkien.
Wow, I'd love to read that. I love Tolkien.
But because it spans that timeline of that point, both in our country and of the church, the late 50s through the tumult of the 60s, civil rights movement, Vietnam War, all through the 60s. And at the same time as all that is happening is Vatican II. And so it's this fascinating look to me of this group of young people, this group of young sisters trying to make sense of all those things happening. And they're doing it in a lot of ways the same way as the rest of the world, the secular world, but in a lot of ways, it's coming from this very particular sisterly place.
Wow.
And so that's one of those where you have to look at them as a bulk to me at least, to see what the full scope of what the piece is.
Yeah. I find that really interesting too, because as we're talking, I'm thinking, so somebody goes to Emmitsburg and they say, oh, well, there's the archives here. Our first thought may be they are the archives of Elizabeth Ann Seton. And in some ways they are.
Yes.
But they're also the archives of the Daughters of Charity and the Sisters of Charity, and their interaction with government people,
yes.
with leaders in communities, with other religious communities throughout the history, that 10s and earlier, even with Mother Seton arriving in Emmitsburg, that point. But that's not the beginning, because it includes the archives of the Daughters of Charity who came in 1850 but had their own history,
yes.
starting in 1633.
Sure.
So I know one of the exciting pieces for us, the most
yes.
impressive piece, was an original copy or original version, print version.
It is an original letter. The oldest piece in the Emmitsburg archive is the Vincent de Paul letter.
Yeah.
It's a letter written...
And it's an original letter.
It's an original letter, yes. It's by Vincent de Paul, written in 1639. It is a letter from Vincent de Paul to Louise de Marillac, which makes it a double relic.
Wow, that's so amazing.
Vincent did not write it himself. Likely he dictated it to a secretary. And we can do that because of the handwriting, but he did physically sign it. It is an absolute original Vincent letter, even if he didn't write every single word. It's definitely his words. He just didn't write all of them.
Right.
He's giving an update on one of the many, many epidemics that passed through France at the time. The letter was brought over by Bishop Flaget to Mother Seton. So it was a letter from a saint to a saint, given to a saint, which does not make it a double relic. It makes it a triple relic. Brought over by Bishop Flaget, along with the Vincentian rule that Mother Seton used to found her own community, and then became the rule once the two communities merged in 1850. So it's a sort of, I consider it, I think of it as part of like your welcome package to the Vincentian family.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. I think when we saw it, again, you brought that out when we were in the archives. And again, I just can't even express how much to hear us talk about it is like, wow, that's a pretty cool thing. When you see it and you understand who touched this, you begin to say, my goodness, this one little thing has been in existence and preserved, which says it has some value, that people would continue to preserve it. Each time we accept it and do something with it, we're saying it still has value, and then it gains that sense of awe and wonder that from the 1600s, right, till 2023, this document still gets brought out to say, this is the beginning of something. This was a gift brought over. And I'm in my mind thinking, we can't get mail sometimes from St. Louis to Emmitsburg in a week. Somebody carried this letter, Bishop Flaget carries this letter in very precarious travel arrangements in those days. But even before he got his hands on it, Vincent sent it to Louise, and Louise held on to it, and somebody got it from her and held on to it, so that Bishop... The history of it just is astounding. And then for it to be given as kind of a gift connects us to that longer history. And that's why I was trying to point out that sense that the archives are not just moments in time. They're and they're not just like they start with Elizabeth Ann, although, you know, St. Elizabeth Ann is obviously important in this country. Yeah. You know, we just had, and I'm sure our listeners have heard this a number of times, and again, we're recording just not long after the translation or the moving of the Lumiere,
Yes.
the writing of St. Louise, done probably in the 1640s, but of her experience of 1623. Again, this is 2023, so 400 years ago, Louise has an experience, and she writes it out and preserves it for herself, carries it on her person throughout her life, which was fairly long in that time, 61. It is then taken by the sisters and preserved by them, and now 400 years it was with the congregation of the mission, the priests, and now returned to the Daughters of Charity. This, so many years later, we're saying St. Louise and St. Vincent had this relationship together. Their letters, this is all we have. They didn't write books.
Absolutely.
They didn't write big theological books, but there's so much theology and understanding in their writings. This is what we have, the day-to-day life of these two people, their relationship together, and how their fidelity to God's providence and God's will for them continued to create who we are today. And then to have this document, this relic, to be handed over in a way that ceremonially reconnects us, reconnects the seams. Not that we were ever disconnected, but it says one more time, this relationship is forever. It's real, and it hasn't diminished in 400 years.
Yeah. But even because you go and say how the theology, they didn't write books. And I'm not discounting people who write books. If you sit down and write a book, there's a certain amount of clear and prescient forethought and systematic logic and thought into what goes into that has to take place. If you're writing a letter that's very much related to the events of the day, I suppose there's a certain level of forethought of, should I say this, should I not say this? It's significantly less, because if it's happening in the day and you're reacting to what happened that day or that week, you have to just get the information down. It's a theology that comes very much through in the moment and in the action, not as a system of forethought.
Yeah, we were just talking about this in our instruction class with the seminary sisters, saying, looking at St. Louise's writings, and this was just my own observation of how we can look at the way she writes, her letters, right? When she writes to Vincent, we always have this sense that she's anxious, that she's trying to get something done, that she's afraid she's in the way. She's always saying it's my lack of skill that's making this not happen. And she can sound, some people say, well, she was kind of neurotic and she had depression. And, and because she's speaking to Vincent, both as spiritual director and her friend, who she's trying to get him to move, but he's also involved in the movement of this company. She's trying to get these girls moving. When she writes to the sisters, it has a different tone. She's either writing very intimately to them, like, I know that you're not feeling well, but hang in there, and God will protect. She writes to Elizabeth Martin, who was having all kinds of difficulties. I get it. I understand that you're sad, and I've been in that place too in my life. And so she speaks to them very gently, but then she also says, you need to go do this and talk to so-and-so, and this is how you barter, and this is what bread is worth today, and so make sure you're getting the right. She's very, we've got to, because we have responsibility. Then when you read her thoughts and her own reflections, her journal entries, her retreat reflections, that's where her theology shows up, where she writes about the gifts of the Holy Spirit. She writes about the Trinity. We just had in one of our prayers a piece of her writing about the Trinity being, the coming of the Holy Spirit completed the Trinity as the gift of God to the church and made the church whole. To me, that was just a profound but a profound way of writing about the Feast of the Holy Trinity, right, that we were able to read. We come to Mass and we still hear, we can't explain the Holy Trinity. It's a mystery. And here she just says, it's God's gift to complete the church, to complete his gift, Father, Son, and Spirit. And I thought, that's a different writing than what she says to the sisters and how she writes to Vincent. So we can see the depth of personality. We all have those sides, as you're saying, and these writings are a reflection of what's happening with them, and who they're speaking to also tells us something about why it's written and the way it's written. I just find that really interesting.
Yeah, it's and you see that today with modern sisters too. Obviously a letter written on letterhead, if you were administrator of a hospital, is going to be very different from an oral history interview you gave.
Right.
And we do go and try and capture. We do go and try and capture sisters' life stories in that way. Sometimes, particularly if sisters are getting older, it can be a little bit of a race against the clock.
Yes. Yeah.
But there's some phenomenal stories in the archive that really show a person's full character.
Yes.
We know there are people in history who went and burned their own journals and burned their own letters. If there are any daughters of the province listening, my thought is if that is something that you are thinking about, if number one, and as much as it kind of kills me to say this, if you have your personal writings and you want to keep those personal or private, tell your sister servant, or in a will, say destroy this or do it yourself. And if you don't want us to see that, then that is your right and prerogative, and professionally and personally, I have to say that.
Of course, yeah. And I guess it goes back to our point at the beginning that this sense of archival information isn't always going to be just what's being held in a climate controlled environment and in boxes, and we use it, our gloved hands. Maybe someday something I've done or something you've done will be treated that way, because someone will say, can you believe how somehow this was preserved?
Sure.
And we don't want to touch it because it will disintegrate, or the ink is disappearing, or something's happening to it. But that in the archives is the building of those things. It's the bricks that keep telling the story over and over. A story that's now, 400, even more, because when we think about the life of Vincent and Louise, it was even before those 400 years of our company.
That's very true.
That their lives impacted the way the story starts and how the story gets told later. We know the story of St. Louise has changed over time, not because it wasn't true, but because it was all we could only appreciate her sense of her illegitimacy as a child, not knowing who her parents were. We don't historically know.
Yeah.
So we're willing, more and able now culturally to accept that her birth was not to a happily married couple, and that tells us so much about her.
Yeah, it clearly affected her.
Exactly.
And that clearly affected the way that she was thought about afterward for a long while. Vincent was kind of fast-tracked to sainthood, or his sainthood was recognized very, very quickly. Louise took a solid 300 years or so.
Right. Yeah, before we were really able to acknowledge what a remarkable woman she is. We've talked a lot in the seminary about how many of the saints of the Vincentian family are kind of quiet saints. Catherine Labouré never spoke about, Vincent and Louise. Vincent certainly is known through the works of charity in the church, but his life and his legacy of refounding the priesthood, and his legacy around really giving power to women at a time when women had no power.
Yeah.
That he and Louise really just revolutionized. It may not have been understood then, but I think we can look back at it now and say these were young women who had nowhere to succeed anything in their lives. And here they opened this door They
gave a chance to have a profession, have a vocation, have a profession, and have a choice in that.
Right.
When they didn't before. They said, go in 2s and 3s and travel the countryside. What?
Exactly.
What?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you can't dismiss that. And then because of that action and their courage, their audacity to keep it going, and again, because of what was preserved we know exactly what was happening. We know exactly how they had to manage and maneuver and figure this out, and how they trained the sisters. Elizabeth Seton shows up, and her life then intersects, because we need a way for her to teach children. The only thing we knew then are the Ursulines who were here, and maybe other that was semi-cloistered at best, or cloistered. And the only thing out there that was able to give her the freedom to teach on the property she received from Samuel Cooper was this rule written that long ago, which at its time was like mind-blowing, and so edgy, really. I love to talk about how edgy, because it was part of the evolution. But today there's I think a way we need to get this story out there, and the preservation of the archives helps us to do that.
I know we have a researcher working on a book. I'm not going to say names right now. I know the book is still in progress. But this gentleman is working on a project related to the various hospitals. And particularly in 19th and into early 20th century, when women were running business like the notion that women were running major institutions, I don't want to say business, because that implies a motive that doesn't quite fit, but a major corporation, kind of. A corporation, an institution, it's all sisters, man. And you have, obviously they're working with men and with prominent male figures in the community, and certainly with the priesthood, but where you see major civic figures, who at this time were all men, reaching out to the daughters saying, we need help and you're the ones who can do it. That's a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. It is. And again, I think we have a humility that helps us to say, well, we were doing what was in front of us. We had to help. Hospitals in the United States had to get built. You don't see those in other countries the way they emerged here. It was a cultural and social needs both, and obviously medical needs, physical needs of people as well. And we responded as we would respond to anything. But you're right, when you start looking at saying these are women, religious women, who are building, not just building in concept. They are walking around with architectural plans, and they're trying to build these things so that they can help the poor. It is crazy. It's absolutely crazy, and it's something that we need to continue to tell. And it's too soon,
In some cases, absolutely. Yeah.
But what's preserved today will tell the story later of the courage and the fortitude and the intellect and the incredible business savvy of these women. There's just no way. You can land a plane on some of these buildings that they built,
Yeah.
I mean, they're built well and they're structurally sound. The inners sometimes are a problem, but Scott, I know we've really talked a lot around a lot of things, and I so appreciate our conversation. And all of it tells me we do need to have some more of these conversations.
I would be happy to do it. I keep trying to. I'm always looking for new ways to. I mean, this is what I like to do. I love to do this type of outreach.
Yeah. So I think it's great, and we'll definitely have you on again.
Sure.
And I just really again appreciate your time today. And again, I appreciate the care you have for the heritage of the company, because it's so precious to us. And we're out doing our work, and we're so grateful that you're here doing yours. So thank you.
Sure. Can I do a few little promos here
Absolutely.
before we leave?
Absolutely.
So a few things that we're working on in the archives right now. We have a few new records up through our colleagues at CRRA, Catholic Research Resources Alliance, including a medical guidebook from the 1840s authored by a daughter charity and mother Mary Xavier Clark. That's up online. We're working with our partners at Digital Maryland to go and get the collection for the Frederick St. John's School put up. So hopefully that will be up by the end of the year. We're going to try to use that as sort of a pilot program to share some of the other collections with some of the areas that aren't as connected to the daughters anymore. I'm thinking of you, Boston. And we're also going to be working with DePaul University over the next year or two to go and digitize all of Mother Seton's writing.
Wow, that's great.
We have a new exhibit opening in October up at the Seton Shrine on the history of the daughter's habit. So if you're passing through the area, we would be happy to see you come and visit.
All right, thanks for that. And you can always check their website.
So we have a page on the daughter's main site, but if you're really interested in information and writings and other things, go to docarchivesblog.org. And for any questions on reference, we work with academics, we work with genealogists, we work with people in historical societies or hospitals, former daughter locations. Please email archives@doc.org.
There you go. Thank you.